My name is Paul Clark, as Larry said. My job actually is Head of Organisational Learning in the Metropolitan Police, so a few of you can hold on to that one because that's a tough gig right now, isn't it? We are trying to make sense of knowledge management, and many of the forces are the same. Corporate memory, how we link individual and corporate learning, and how we systemise that. So that's my role. But today we're going to talk about how we are attempting to build research capability in police forces and other bodies. And there are three speakers, so I won't take very long. The first is Liz Ward, who is the head of the Strategic Insight Unit in the Metropolitan Police. Second will be Roger Pegram, who many of you know, I think, but in Greater Manchester Police. And the third is Cyril Amberg, who comes from the Swiss Police Institute. So, Liz, thank you very much.
Liz Ward, I'm head of the Strategic Insight Unit. I work with Jeff Barnes, who many of you have met and has obviously already presented. So I'm just going to give about 10 minutes just to introduce you to the team, almost all of whom are here today, because this is a really important part of our work to really link with the evidence-based policing community. So I'll just tell you a bit about what we do, where we are, and you have our contact details as well. So if you want to reach out to us, by all means do, because we'll be interested to hear from you. So just to give you a sense, what is the SIU? So the Strategic Insight Unit, we are small. There's about 10 to 12 of us. We are central, very central. We are multidisciplinary. I'll come back to that in a moment in terms of the skills that we have in the team. But the intention when it was set up about 3 years ago, and I think, I don't know if Simon Rose is here today, but I know there are others here who were very much involved in getting the team in place years ago in the Met. But the idea was that this is a very central team which has analytical resource and expertise that can really support the central decision making and management in the Met. So working to the Commissioner, to the Deputy Commissioner, Management Board and senior leaders. It's very much about really looking at and addressing those really important central strategic challenges that the Met faces. In terms of who we are, so as I mentioned, we have Jeff in the team. He's our principal criminologist and very much kind of our hub of analytical knowledge. And he has a team of data scientists and analysts, some of whom we've got here. We've got Andreas in the room, we've got Ben online somewhere, and we've got Kent McFadzean, who we're gradually stealing from Kent. So we're kind of trying to build our analytical expertise, but really we do emphasise the nerdiness in our team. It's full-on geek in our team, and we're proud of it. So there's lots of data analysis science going on. We have officers in the team. Many of us will know Ben Linton over there somewhere. Thank you. And Katie Harbour as well, who was speaking yesterday. And we've got Luke May as well in the room. So we're trying to build our operational team, and very much that's central to what we do, which is linking the analytics with the operational understanding. It really wouldn't work if we didn't have that contextual understanding of how to actually embed the learning and make it have an impact. Last but not least, we've got the behavioural scientists. So we've got James over there and myself. We both work to the behavioural insights team, so we come with that background of the understanding of the behavioural science and how you can apply that, and linking it to the randomised control trial and the kind of the evaluation methodology. So really thinking about how you can translate understanding into solutions and then test those solutions in situ. So lots of different skills that we bring together. So what do we do with those? Broadly speaking, we have three different ways in which we work. We explain, and that really comes back to the analysis. So we look at the patterns in data. We do have access to a huge amount of data. So we look at how we can use the tools that we've got to understand what's happening and answer some of those questions that are really challenging in terms of some of the issues that have been mentioned at this conference related to, all sorts of different powers and tools and stop and search and strip search and all sorts of different things that are very interesting for all of us. We innovate, so that's very much about taking that learning from elsewhere and applying it from behavioural economics, from criminology, and from the operational expertise as well, so that we can bring those insights in. And finally, we test. So obviously you heard about the Operation Avert from Jeff. You've heard from Katie about the work that she's been doing on Turning Point, and we do a lot of evaluation work. Where we can, we focus on that gold standard, but we do what's proportionate depending on what the challenge is in terms of evaluating interventions and activity across the Met. So the focus is always about being as rigorous as possible and really trying to bring that evidence-based approach to the work that we do. We have lots of other roles within the Met, and one of those is about really being a critical friend. So we do spread quite wide in terms of our impact in challenging and bringing that kind of evidence-based approach to as many places as we can. We promote evidence-based policing, very actively involved in the Society for Evidence-Based Policing and elsewhere. And I think that key really for here, being a conduit to academia and bringing kind of your knowledge and expertise into the Met. So just trying to make sure that we've got that link. And we've also started to build that through actually bringing academics from universities to work within the team on a temporary basis, which is a way that we found to circumvent some of the very long and tiring recruitment issues that Paul and I deal with, and I'm sure many others do. So also is another route that we can get that kind of expertise and capability into and resourcing into the team. The rest are really just other ways in which we're just trying to bring that insight, linking to the operational world, linking to the different ways we can bring analysis and evaluation in. But you might be most interested, I'm not sure, but in terms of what our priority programs of work, and obviously big changes coming to the Met, which we're really excited about. But for the moment, and I don't think anyone will be surprised to see, these are our three big topics of interest where we focus most of the team's energy. Disproportionality is huge. Obviously, Rachel referenced with the work that's been going on elsewhere. And in terms of internally in the Met, the approach we're taking from SIU perspective is to take kind of a three-step approach where we first look at the analysis, look at the data and see what we can understand at specific touch points. So look at what can we see where we can look at that record level data and do detailed regressions to say what are the factors that contribute to a particular decision and to what extent does ethnicity. That's where we're starting to, in terms of disproportionality, but we do intend to look at other protected characteristics. To what extent does ethnicity play a role, and to what extent does that is that explained by societal factors, or to what degree is that decision making that you could attribute to the police or to police decision making. So that's the first stage. The next stage is then to look at, well, what can we do about it? So that's where we bring that knowledge from the operational context, from the behavioural science world, to think, well, when we've got inconsistency of decision making, what tools can you bring into a particular context that could help? And that's a really tricky space that if anyone has interesting ideas, we'd be really interested in hearing about. We're using a lot of vignette studies at the moment to really understand and explore decision making. And that's a space that is really tricky when you're trying to say what is the right decision for an individual to make in a really complex scenario, and how can you test and then have a way of monitoring whether or not something's changed or improved over time. Because the third stage is ultimately to test and evaluate and see if we can demonstrate positive change over time. So that's our disproportionality work. Violence is very much the work that we do with Commander Murray, and Jeff has already talked extensively about the OPERVERT work, which has been very resource intensive, as you can imagine, with the scale of that piece of work for the team. And then, very unsurprisingly, obviously, rebuilding trust is a huge piece of work for the Met. We very much play a role in that respect, kind of being a conduit to academia where there is a lot of expertise. This is not a new challenge in many ways. There's a lot of academics who've done a lot of work in this space. So interpreting and bringing that into the Met and making sure that there's an understanding of what the drivers are and what works is really key to our role there.
So, Roger Pegram, I'm working with Greater Manchester Police at the moment. Over the last few years, it's been quite noticeable and in the news all around us being under enhanced scrutiny, HMIC looking at us and things. So in terms of our strategic drivers and what we're doing, using evidence-based policing, problem solving and setting up, I just want to speak to you a little bit around some of the things and the work streams that I'm working on at the moment. So strategic drivers, there we have our plan on a page, our chief's vision. But we also have, the Home Office crime measures, the neighbourhood policing guidelines and everything else that's coming into play, and what we can do from the centre to actually enhance that, build on it and support our people. So EBP and GMP, we have an evidence-based policing hub that now sits within the prevention hub. So the next slide, I'll show you the sort of structure that we've got in there. We have an EBP board that's held monthly, chaired by the ACC, Chris Sykes. We have an EBP forum every 2 months where we're discussing with our evidence-based champions what the latest sort of evidence is, how things are moving with academic partners that we're working with. So we had, I think on the last count, it was around about 120 different pieces of academic research and that we'd collaborated with different universities, different partners on. 130 evidence-based champions. So these have been getting slowly built over time. They move all the time because they get promoted, they move jobs and everything else. So trying to have that nice spread across is really difficult. But what we have done is we've done the online training for EBP. We've worked hard on keeping those numbers up and keeping people involved through taking them to conferences, keeping them energized. Problem solving. Really important. That's one of the things that HMIC looked at us about, was how do we centrally record problem solving, how do we know that it's happening. And problem solving and evidence-based policing, two sides of the same coin, not mutually exclusive. How do we build that in? And I'll speak a little bit about that in a second. What worked, what didn't, and what's promising is a meeting that we have quarterly. That kind of eased off a little bit before COVID, so that's getting restarted. But it's the opportunity for people to come up and not talk about a finished product. It's the opportunity for them to come and talk about what's in flight and also talk about things that they did that didn't work or went wrong. And equally, we will help create problem-solving plans and evidence-based policing plans around that. And academic qualification support. So something that I'm going to be speaking more with chief officers about. But GMP has a history of sending people to the Cambridge programme and supporting them academically, which we need to carry on and build on. So the force prevention model, so my bit right at the top, the force prevention hub, that features, that's all your strategic partners. So how are we working with the CSPs and other major partners that can take away parts of a problem or parts of an evidence-based test that we're doing and help us build on that by supporting us with their data, supporting us with removing blockages. So some of the stuff that we're doing is around 136 sections and the mental health beds and the ease of access, and really taking it down to removing some of the blockages that are felt on the front line by speaking to the right partners at the top. But the idea really is that neighbourhood policing teams are educated enough that they can do good problem-solving plans. So we've adopted SARA again. It's been there for years. It's been called OSARA, but that doesn't really fit because you shouldn't be stating your outcome before you've done your scanning or your analysis. But SARA doesn't sound as good, so we've just cut the O out and gone with SARA. But the idea, if the neighbourhood officer can't deal with that problem themselves and they need some support, they can go to the local districts. So Julia Hall's here, a really good case in point, because we've supported her with the academic qualification of coming to Cambridge and being here. She has a team of crime reduction coordinators. They sit in the middle bit, which is your neighbourhood prevention hubs. So we've got integrated offender management in there. We've got problem-solving experts in there. We've got people who are being educated in evidence-based techniques and testing in there, people who can identify that they need support academically, and we can facilitate that at the top. So, responsible for the force demand, strategic demand reduction, structured models around problem-solving, and also the intelligence function. So getting intelligence, but not just from within Greater Manchester Police, from within all our partners, and how do we draw that together? Equally, the Centre of Excellence, that's all the things I spoke about where we're talking around evidence-based policing forums and meetings and the like. So, Just Right Policing, Tom Kirchmeyer, friend of the Society of Policing, certainly a friend of evidence-based policing, looking at refreshing some of the stuff that we thought we knew. So this is, the darker the red, the more policing we're given compared to the crime counts. So we are over-policing some areas, under-policing other areas, and how do we understand that? And these results will be getting told at the Society Conference in October. But through the medium of problem solving, what we're looking at is an evidence-based response. So in terms of evidence gaps, there's two types of evidence gap, which would be where there is no evidence to support what you know, and the other is where there's a wealth of evidence, but you're just not using it. So certainly listening to this conference over the last few days, I've listed some things that I'd like to challenge myself on, but also, you know, people in leadership positions within your organisations, that turning point and CARA, so our diversion, how good are we at that, and what have we implemented within Greater Manchester Police? We do have diversionary programmes there, but are they as good as this? We've got a wealth of evidence around that. Are we using it? Hotspots patrol. We're coming back into a period after COVID. When was the last time that your nighttime economy hotspots maps were reinvigorated, re-looked at? You know, are we using the latest data? You know, certainly in Greater Manchester, I know a lot of businesses went out of business during COVID, and some of those were the flashpoints. and people are still policing the same patrol plans and the old ones. So certainly this has challenged me around refreshing those patrol plans and looking at the latest data. Procedural justice training, part of my job is to look at the community engagement strategy. One of the things that HMIC have said around the community engagement strategy is how we reach hard to reach communities. Certainly it makes sense. I spoke with Andy Marsh about it, and we'll be taking that forward. Crime harm index, it's never been done in Greater Manchester. We've never assessed our crime counts versus our crime harm. That's something to take away and do. And also super cocooning burglary, which is what my thesis was on. We've got great spreadsheet guardians. You know, I've got sergeants that will list cocooning left, right and centre, but they're kind of doing the work but missing the point. How often do we go back and look at them spreadsheets and look at the survivability of the cocoons? You know, did they actually make a difference? Is it working? Are the messages that are being given by the people who are delivering the cocooning on point? And the other part of it is challenging the assumptions and getting yourself into the right meetings where the decisions are made about the delivery of policing. So I am using my elbows, my foot, trying to get into all these meetings that people don't want me at because I'm determined to be an agitator, and actually get people to challenge their assumptions and put them to the test, and I'd encourage you to do the same.
In Switzerland we have a much different state of things. Evidence-based policing is much less developed, and our institute is trying to develop things and bring operational police bodies and academics together to work on new initiatives, especially in the field of police training. So my presentation will briefly go into some research initiatives that have emerged recently, and then about the role of our institute, the Swiss Police Institute, which has some similarities with the College of Policing, but with much more limited resources, of course. So, first, shortly about policing in Switzerland. We are a federal country. It's a very decentralized policing. You have here the 26 cantons, so every canton is more or less autonomous when it comes to policing. So this creates a very decentralized environment. And we have in total about 330 police organizations. But the most important ones are the 26, which are the cantonal police forces. So it creates a very decentralized environment. And historically, police education was also very decentralized, and the thing that we managed to do in the beginning of the 21st century is to create regional training schools, which you see in different colors, which are, there are 6 of them in the different regions. So we have had some centralization in police training, and our institute, the Swiss Police Institute, is responsible for providing official training materials, for supervising examinations, and for developing learning resources that are harmonized on a national level, which is an important development from before, but it's something that is quite complex to do in a federal state with a decentralized policing system. So these are some of our activities, and we are mainly really a training organization. Our main mandate is to organize further police education and training, and to develop training materials, and we have the intention of developing further activities in the fields of research in collaboration with academic institutions and police organizations in the future. So I can show you 3 initiatives that have been shown in our research conference, which we held last year. It was our an online conference where the different projects from Switzerland and abroad were presented. And we have 3 initiatives here from Zurich, from Basel City, and from Geneva. The first one is a collaboration between the Zurich Cantonal Police, the Zurich Institute for Forensics, and a small company which is called Brainability, and they have worked on cognitive distortions to develop specific training to improve the capabilities of police officers and other people involved in criminal prosecution to limit the impact of cognitive bias. So this is an interesting collaboration that has emerged and that has shown very valid results. Another example, which is quite similar to what was presented also on a much more limited scale in London, is a service called Fac Referral, which was developed recently in the canton of Basel City. It's an interdisciplinary group of specialists from academia that are supporting the police commissioner and the commissioner's office in different fields. They have specialists from sociology, from criminology, from other fields, and this is something that was also in a journal in Germany. It's something that was very interesting, and now they are developing that further into a larger service, which is called Police Science Division in Basel City. So that's an ongoing initiative. And the third one, which I would like to present, is a cooperation between the University of Geneva and the Geneva Cantonal Police around the development of tailor-made virtual reality scenario for initial police training. They have developed a scenario for low-level potential violent encounters so that police personnel can interact and the trainers can adapt by influencing the scenario. So this is something which is supported by different research theses at the University of Geneva. There's an evaluation going on, which is also an ongoing project. So these were three initiatives where the Swiss Police Institute was not directly a part of, and we have different activities in the role of mainly supporting research. We are not an academic institution ourselves, we're really a training organization, but we are trying to support both police officers doing certain curricula where they have to do limited research tasks. So, and also we are publishing a journal which is an in-between of an academic journal and a magazine like the College of Policing is publishing. So we have more the role of a support organization for research both in academia and in police. And recently we have started a pilot study. It was initiated in 2019, but the pilot study is still going on. And we have had funding from the Swiss National Foundation for Science for a longitudinal study to study professional socialization of young police constables that are being trained in the new police training system in Switzerland. So it's a nationwide study. This is done in collaboration with the University of Lausanne and the Zurich University of Applied Science under the direction of Professor Dirk Bayer. So you see here our research topics. It's a really interesting project going on, and maybe at a later point we can present some findings about these topics. So in the future, we have these are our strategic guidelines for the period 2022-25, and one of these guidelines is strengthening research and academic teaching activities. So we have various objectives in this field, but of course it's something really where we are building capacity. We have quite limited resources, and in the environment that I showed you with a very decentralized policing system, it's quite challenging, but I have heard very much relevant information that will help us hopefully to develop interesting initiatives in the future.
Given that you've been through the programme and on your journey, what's your advice to the students that are here today in terms of doing stuff?
Oh, right, okay. I was going to say the first thing to do is enjoy it. It's a remarkable experience and you're blessed to be able to come to this university and study. I think in terms of changing things within your own organisations, it's about getting out there. So first off, what are you going to do with your thesis when it's done? It shouldn't just live on a file in some hard drive or Y drive or whatever they call it within your organisation. Get involved with your evidence-based policing units. If there isn't one, then set one up. Link it into things that are the force are trying to do. Most forces now, if you noticed, our evidence-based policing hub sits within a prevention hub. Prevention is the buzzword of the moment, and everyone's setting up prevention hubs which will sort of soak in the problem solving, the evidence-based policing and everything. Make sure you're a part of that, get involved, talk about your experience with your colleagues and try to get that enthusiasm and support them. And then work with other forces as well. You know, everyone's welcome to get in touch with myself. I know I can extend that from your units and Ben Linton in the Hub, the Society of Evidence-Based Policing. There's tons of support for you. but just don't lose that infectious enthusiasm that everyone that comes here gets.
Hi there, sorry, it's not a question, it's just a plug really. We've got the National Police Library there. You mentioned what you're going to do with your thesis once complete. National Police Library, based at Brighton with the College of Policing, will take the thesis, will catalogue it properly so it's available for other police officers and any users of the National Police Library for them to research and search on. So that's a great facility and ensures that your thesis doesn't just gather dust on a bookshelf somewhere, that it's actually available and can be used across policing. Thank you.
And if I could add to that, the University of Cambridge doesn't own your thesis, you do. So if you want to put it into the National Police Library, that's your decision. If you need to keep it locked up for security reasons so that we can only mark it in a locked room in a police headquarters building, which is something we've done on a number of occasions, that can happen too. But by and large, the essence of science is communication, and the more people find out about your thesis, the better that information can be used, perhaps digested, critiqued, revised through subsequent work, and that's how the whole process works. But I very much welcome the invitation.
I'd really welcome sort of bite-sized little mini events. They really took off in COVID, so like maybe the top 10 of research at the moment in evidence-based policing, or little things, because it's so busy, but if you know they're on, you can tap in, you know, via Teams, and that would just really help, as opposed to, I think I forget to go in, you know, whereas bite-sized, little half-hour, brilliant.
It's on our list to do more bite-sized stuff. We've did a lot of knowledge-sharing events during COVID. They were a bit more getting forces to share all of their case study examples, and they worked really well, but that's a really good idea, so thank you.
I mean, part of the suggestion might be a Google Scholar for policing, in which you don't pull in all sorts of extraneous things. It's just limited to the universe of, for example, the Police National Library.
Yeah, and I think we can connect that, the work that New Zealand have done, I think is quite similar to that. So it's making sure, yeah, that when you do your search, you get back all the things that are really directly relevant to you in a policing role. So yeah, I think we can do some more work on that as well.
Back to the initial comment, and then I'm going to sort of link across to colleagues like the Swiss Police Institute and others. But you talked about bite-sized pieces, just to make it plain. So for the Campbell collaboration, for which I'm the co-chair, every single systematic review has a plain language summary, 2 pages, describes the study, describes what the key findings are, and gives you a clear idea of the takeaway from the process. So go on to the Campbell collaboration website. We've got now, I think, 75 systematic reviews on policing. For those that are doing counter-terrorism or prevention of radicalisation, we have a huge programme where we've got 16 systematic reviews in flight or in the process of publication at the moment on different aspects of CT, each one of them with a clear plain language summary on them. And we're also in the process of trying to translate them into various different languages, because that's important. Cyril knows this only too well, because he understated that was, I think, your 3rd language, if not your 4th language you just did that presentation in, which makes me feel deeply humbled as a fellow Swiss citizen whose first language is English, and I kind of stay there. My French ain't that good. It should be much better. But the other piece that has come, for me, that's come through from Cyril's presentation, and I know from a number of the theses that are in flight this year, is this issue of who it is that is joining and how they're progressing and how the organisation is coping. We've got a range of theses coming through on things like, for example, the progress of neurodiverse officers through the process of recruitment and through the process of promotion. We've got a number of the Australia, from New Zealand, from the Swiss and others who are looking at this challenge in a tight labour market, and with a lot of police forces having suffered in austerity and recruiting back, of the challenges of recruiting large numbers and retaining them and developing them using evidence-based policing. That seems to me to be maybe a 2023 theme that might come through, which is a bit of a challenge to Cyril, because it sounds to me like you might have to come back and tell us how you got on with your study in Geneva.
A footnote on what Peter just said in relation to the last session before lunch, which is that when you study risk factors, either retrospectively or prospectively, you can also eliminate things that often eliminate candidates from being hired. Like, do you have a criminal history? How many remember what the criminal history predictive value is? From the Sussex study, at least. 0. And yet you see all these lurid headlines about police hiring criminals, and they're going to go out and commit more crime. But if it's not predictive, then maybe there's a lot of people who could be very good police officers who were very bad teenagers. I think a lot of forces recognize that for a long time, but whenever the public hears about it for the first time, it's sort of shocking, which suggests we need a very solid evidence base to be able to address that issue, to something that nobody talked about today, but I'd like to perhaps throw back to Paul, which is the relationship between what any of your panelists are doing and the legislatures of their countries or their localities in terms of how evidence may or may not be entering into dialogue between democratically elected governance of the police and the police professionals themselves. Could I throw that question to somebody in your group?
If I got the question, I think it's how it translates. I mean, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because we clearly know that actually our senior officers do talk about this stuff, and we certainly have very live conversations with both legislature and, for example, bodies like the CPS and others. Our big problem, actually, in this, Larry, remains data, actually, and information legislation. I don't know if anybody else agrees. It is my number one issue. I go to board regularly. Liz goes to board regularly. I think everybody else does, in our ability to access and provide data, particularly in what we call sensitive areas. Counter-terrorism is one which we've kind of got round, I think, a bit, Peter, lately, in trying to mark even thesis in subject areas like that. But actually this remains our number one problem, particularly in the Met. We are risk off, actually, in information provision, to be honest. That is our standard take. If you come to us, you know, and you ask for information and you're not a Met officer, even if you are a Met officer, let's be honest, some of you I can see here, it's pretty tough trying to get information where you are not directly involved. But I would suggest this remains our number one issue still. And actually I know, though I do not know the content of it, that conversation is very live right now in freeing that up a bit. I'd like to see where that goes. I don't have the answer. But it is definitely live. Some conversations I had not 6 months ago, and remain through our data office in the Met, through our head of data, who's a lady called Amy Reid, who's very actively engaged in that conversation and about opening up data provision. There is also the National Data Hub conversation, isn't there? I think many people will be aware of that. There is the open data source conversation being had. So I think all of that has got to be brilliant. And if we can open that up, then I think that other conversation goes away to some extent. We can make our own decisions and risk about what information to share and where to go with it.
If you were going to give one piece of advice to somebody who's trying to pitch to a skeptic in a senior role, something that you've got evidence to support or you want to try out, what would your piece of advice be?
Be prepared, in the sense that you can't just go in with an idea. It has to be, how can it land? You need to figure out the implications in the context. What's the cost? Is it realistic? You can't go in with an idea that isn't prepared in that sense, but also really thinking about what's like going back to the behavioural science of this, from their perspective, what's the incentive for them? What do they get to take? Is it that they'll take this as an opportunity that they can take for promotion for themselves? Is it an opportunity to save money? Is it an opportunity to just draw attention in a positive way to the force? So I think really playing it from both sides, that incentive side is so important to get the attraction and the salience of what you're doing. And that's a huge part of what we do constantly, just building that salience of the work that we're doing. But yeah, the practical implementation side of it is absolutely key as well.
I've got one thing to add, and that's find your officer and then let your senior officer have that conversation with you, right? I mean, we have in the Met Alex Murray, who is always good to go to if you've got an idea and he likes it, because he'll sell it up the chain, and by the time you get to the DEP or the commissioner, they've heard it, right? So you're actually selling to an open door. That would be my take on that as well. It works very well for us. They get a lot of ask, you know. I mean, we I think have a little more than 200 research pieces going on across the Met at any one time, and I know other organisations have the same number. So, you know, there's a huge ask on people. And they do get a little bit weary of us sort of turning up at the door and saying, can I have a look at something else? And by the way, could you give me a bit of money to do it? which is usually the second ask. They're expecting that one. But yeah, that would be my take. I mean, there are, as Larry very kindly said at the beginning of the Met, we've put through 83, I think, officers of inspector rank and above over the last 4 years. We started sending 4 a year. We are now happily able to send 20 a year at the moment, providing I can find some money, which we keep doing. Thank you, Liz, for last year, by the way, to those of you who are here. We find it anywhere we can get it. Violence reduction funding, GRIP funding, anywhere we can find it, we'll use it. And it is, I have to say, considered to be a valid use of funding, which I'm really happy with. It's a valid use of funding. Senior officers do not disagree with that.
Could I just add to that the Home Office has confirmed to Merseyside and others this week that they can use some of the violence prevention funding for those forces that have it. They can use that to add to the apprenticeship levy funding for English police officers taking this course, which would mean that the cost to the force is zero, with 100% of the top-up coming from the violence funding. Of course, there's still the 20% abstraction, which is a concern to many forces, but I was encouraged by that fairly consistent policy at the Home Office since Jackie Sabir was the initial NPCC lead on the violence reduction work, and so that's pretty solid. Now, if force wants to spend its money on other things, there's also possibilities for bursaries that we're negotiating, in which the force could put up half of the top-up money and the other half would be coming from this potential bursary source. But stay tuned for further information. We hope to be sending around letters to all the chief constables about that within the next 4 weeks. Now, these are just English forces, and I know I'm being very parochial, but I do want to say that the conversations that we're having, at least with certain parts of the world, are re-examining the idea of teaching part of the program in that region. To be specific, I think most likely possibility would be Australia and New Zealand, where for some reason there seems to be fairly substantial representation, and we'll be trying to pursue that. But in the meantime, we're also very glad to have our European participation, and if we think geographically rather than politically, it seems for some reason that England's pretty close to the rest of Europe, if I could say that without getting, lynched. And we hope we can get over the transportation difficulties that are getting in the way of anybody crossing any border by any means at the moment. But further questions before we lose this very expert and accomplished group of people who are making evidence-based policing happen?
As many of you know, it's a fairly sort of perverse system for officers, particularly right now, isn't it? Since if you're a new joiner, you get your degree paid for, and if you're a senior leader, you might get it half paid for, at least. But if you're in between and you're still clever, you kind of got a bit of an issue. So we run an academic bursary scheme. We fund at least 50% of any postgraduate. We will fund 100% actually of any PhD where the organisation agrees that that is a subject matter that it wants to study. So it goes both ways. So if you are a PC, for example, and you want to study a degree, then there's an exception. We might fund 100% of that. But if you're earning any decent money, which as a sergeant, I'm afraid those of you who know many sergeants, you can earn pretty well. So generally, if you get above a constable or a staff band of E rank, we don't fund anything 100% other than a PhD. But we will do that. And so anybody, and interest, we have 17, which is, not huge, but it's not a bad number. We have 17 PhD candidates in the Met at the moment. When I started the program 5 years ago, we had 2. And I fully expect those, having come through undergraduate and through to postgraduate degrees, a good proportion of those will carry on. So I've asked the Met, I don't know about the rest of you, for quite a lot more money over the next 3 years. They looked at me and took the piece of paper. I hope I'm going to get it, because I reckon, actually, 3 years from now, we're going to have a significantly bigger number of postgraduate students than we have currently, and therefore potentially a big number of PhDs.
When you've got those masters or PhDs or you want to study them, please do talk to me. My team is always looking for extra talent, and I think half of my team are doing their PhDs while working. It's like the kind of place where we really encourage that. So yeah, just a plug. Sorry, shameless, completely shameless.
I think facilitating the front line's ideas is so important, and it's what structures and mechanisms you've got within your organisation to make sure that that happens. So I mentioned before that we have an EBP board chaired by the ACC, Chris Sykes. You know, the front line within Greater Manchester Police know that if they witness something where they think we can do it better or whatever, if they need some support, they can come through that, and we'll put it through the board. We'll find academic support for them, and we'll listen to the front line ideas. So it's not just about problem solving. It's also around how do you build the evidence base around things that we don't know, or testing them assumptions that in areas that we think we could go better. But these aren't discussions that are happening at senior leadership meetings. This is, you know, speaking with our front line and making sure that we absorb all the ideas from everyone in the organisation.